A decade ago, Britain decided to leave the European Union. Now, it finds itself in a difficult position because it needs Europe just as much as Europe needs Britain. But with Donald Trump as part of the equation, the process of getting back together is neither simple nor obvious. So, what's next for Keir Starmer? Stay with me to find out here on Wider View. And I'm your host, Mateusz Mazzini. Good evening. Our main story tonight has a center of gravity somewhere in the middle of the English Channel. In the span of just a few weeks, Britain has signed two pivotal documents with its main trade partners, the United States and the European Union. Both were hailed as major successes. Both are expected to improve Britain's standing in the world. But we all know that in international politics, especially with the world as profoundly polarized as it is now, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. Trump and his administration would love to pull Britain further away from Europe. The American president himself loves the country, its royals, as well as the Scottish golf courses. But Keir Starmer is no fan of the MAGA movement. And what's more, he feels the gravity of the current zeitgeist. He would love to be the Winston Churchill of his own times. A full commitment to Europe would antagonize Trump, while a move closer to Brussels would make him an easy target, both at home and abroad. So, what are his options? We explore them in our report.
Only a year ago, many in the Labour Party were hopeful and optimistic about their future. Having defeated the Conservatives and reclaimed power after 14 years, there was nothing to complain about. In fact, some of the party leaders were convinced that they had a decade in power ahead of them. Now that enthusiasm is gone, as well as the confidence about the future. The first months in power were difficult, both at home and abroad. Growth is sluggish, defense spending remains low, and migration continues to be a major issue. Most importantly, Nigel Farage has risen to be the most popular politician in the country. Recent polls show that his party, Reform UK, is top of the charts. Starmer is trying to outflank him with a turn rightward, but this might not work, especially given the fact that Farage is heavily backed by MAGA influencers. Labour is pursuing a delicate balancing act now. The deal signed with the US was largely ceremonial, hailed as the first one of the Trump era. But it is unlikely to change the dynamics of the bilateral trade between Washington and London. Opposition politicians say Britain is in a comfortable position because it doesn't have a massive trade surplus. But it hasn't stopped Trump from imposing new tariffs on its British partners. Meanwhile, Europe looks at London with hope. Ursula von der Leyen knows she needs Starmer's decisive stance on Ukraine. Yet, the Prime Minister seems to have lost his footing on the issue. Initially seen as a key supporter, he later backtracked from the idea of sending British troops to Ukraine. As a result, in times of desperately needed clarity, Britain's foreign policy is anything but clear.
Which team is London playing in? Does Great Britain actually have to choose between Europe and the United States? And how serious is the threat of Nigel Farage rising into power? Times are difficult and very complex, so we decided to invite guests whose experience will make a difference in trying to answer those questions. And I'm pleased to say, joining me tonight are Ivan Rogers, former UK permanent representative to the European Union, and David Henig, director of the UK Trade Policy Project. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to Wider View.
Good evening.
Ivan, I want to start with you. If you could give us a sort of bird's eye view about Britain's foreign policy in trade right now. Is it closer to the US? Is it closer to Europe? Or is it neither of the two, somehow drifting without clear foreign policy priorities in trade, but also, I guess, in general?
Well, it's a great question. I think drifting is probably still the right epithet for it, although in fairness to the government, I think they are trying to inject urgency and inject more prioritisation than we had under the previous government. Inevitably, I think, any British Prime Minister, and this applies to every Prime Minister I've ever worked for going back 30 or 40 years, is always going to say there's no reason to choose between the EU and the US. We don't have to make this choice. We're not obliged to choose between partners. And in a post-Brexit world, they're also going to say it's imperative to do deals with India and with other major players and with the Gulf states and to make the best of the position we're in. On the US, look, the US has obviously been easily our most important external strategic ally now for many decades, certainly since the Second World War. It's inevitable for any UK Prime Minister of any colour that the security and defence relationship is more dominated by the US than by the European Union. On the trade side, we know that obviously in terms of volumes of trade, both on goods and services, the EU dwarfs the US, even though the US is the largest single national partner. Can he carry on with this kind of, we don't have to choose, we must have both, we can improve and deepen the relationship with both partners at once? Well, as I say, in a sense, I think he's condemned to say that and will pursue it, and I don't see that changing in the lifetime of this Parliament.
Excellent introduction for my next question. Let's talk about those 5 pages of text with you, David. Let's actually try to decompose what we have here. An agreement, I guess, for lack of a better word, with the United States. What does it actually encompass? And how important is it? And for whom? Is it more important for Trump or for the British side?
So, even within the 5 pages, the content of the UK-US trade deal has some parts that are meant to come into force soon and some which are longer-term aspirations. So the UK would get tariff relief as soon as this is implemented on car exports to the US. Mm-hmm. The UK exports about 100,000 cars per year to the US. We were facing tariffs of 25%. They will be lowered as a result of this deal once implemented. That's particularly important for a couple of companies, in particular Jaguar Land Rover. The steel sector should also get some reduction in tariffs, though this is slightly problematic because part of it is owned by a Chinese company. And it's not clear that the US will allow that company to benefit from lower steel tariffs. But if that situation is resolved, then the UK would have lower tariffs there as well. Mm-hmm. In return, the US gets a higher quota of high-quality beef exports. That's still within, without changing UK food rules, but it dramatically increases the amount that could be imported from the US, and also a huge increase in potential US exports of bioethanol into the UK. And that will make a difference. It will potentially cause problems for a couple of industrial plants in the UK, but it will be an area where the US can increase exports fairly rapidly into the UK.
Okay, I'm gonna jump on this. I'm gonna jump on this real quick because there seems to be some reasons for cautious optimism when it comes to trade between Britain and the United States. But I wanted to jump on the second part of the equation, which is the deal between United Kingdom and the European Union. And before I ask my next question, let's hear from Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself announcing what the deal with the EU will actually mean for Britain.
And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA. all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
So, staying with you, David, what does that actually mean that Britain got the best access from any non-EU member state without crossing its own red lines?
Essentially, what the UK has agreed to with the EU is that food and drink trade should become barrier-free. So that means that anything produced in the UK or caught in the UK can be exported with no hurdles to the EU, and likewise from the EU into the UK. Now, that's just for food and drink at this stage. But that's an important element. No country outside of the single market and Switzerland has that access. The second part, potentially important, is that the UK may well join the energy single market. Again, that is not something that other countries have access to. And they're also in talks to link our emissions trading schemes to avoid carbon border adjustment mechanism charges. Now, the Prime Minister, like all politicians, will exaggerate the potential impact of these changes. These are not going to transform the UK economy. They are, however, moving us into a different place on UK-EU relations, moving us beyond the really the anger and the emotions of the whole Brexit period from 2016 to really through to 2022 or thereabouts, moving it onto a new footing where the two sides are talking about removing barriers, but it still will leave a lot of difficulties in place. The trade is already tariff-free. This will reduce some of the barriers remaining, but many will still be in place. So this is not, this doesn't change everything, but it is a good start to moving on from Brexit.
So on that note, turning over to you, Ivan, when Prime Minister Starmer says we're not crossing the red lines, for purposes of an intellectual exercise, maybe Britain should actually try to cross some of its own self-imposed red lines to benefit its trade with the European Union.
Yes, I think there are two red lines which are immutable, at least for this Parliament, and maybe beyond it, which are single market, essentially because of free movement of people and rule-taking, although I'll come back to the rule-taking question, and customs union, creating a customs union with the EU. Though there are clearly some cabinet voices and other voices inside the Labour Party who would want a customs union. But that's not where the Prime Minister is, and I don't think that's where this government could go or wants to go. I think some of the red lines have been modified, at least to a degree. I mean, as David rightly says, on food and drink and on energy, there is a move towards dynamic alignment in the jargon. And dynamic alignment was a complete no-no under the previous government. So it's not completely true that the red lines are the same as the previous governments. Likewise, this government is more relaxed about a broader role for the European Court of Justice. Not wholly relaxed, but it's not as obsessed with the powers of the European Court of Justice and its kind of surveillance of key areas of the economy where one might benefit from dynamic alignment. I think, as David rightly says, the Prime Minister inevitably kind of overstates the benefits, and at macro level, they're pretty small. This is not a transformative breakthrough deal for the UK economy, nor is the US one, even if the US one were completed, nor is the India one. So we should be serious that in macroeconomic terms, these are not game changers.
I wanted to turn back to you, David, and ask about something of a bigger picture. I know you're an expert on trade, but we all know that foreign policy is not just trade. And when you look at the strategic alignment between Britain and the United States, as Ivan said before, by far the most important strategic partner of Britain for decades. So how important is Britain for Americans and America for Britons right now? So in other words, how much of a special relationship is there really still in place? Or maybe that's just a myth that is long gone.
The UK-US relationship has always been more special to the UK than the US. But I think at the moment, it's probably at quite a high point in the US as well, oddly enough. President Trump actually quite likes the UK. He particularly likes Scotland. He's also under pressure to do some trade deals to not just to show that he's not just putting on tariffs, but he can do deals as well second time round. And he's finding that the UK government is a willing partner for that. Personally, he actually has a strong relationship with Sir Keir Starmer, which has come as a little bit of a surprise to many people. So at this stage, and I've been talking to a few people just in the last few hours on both sides of this, and they genuinely say the relationship is surprisingly good. They hadn't expected it to be in this state, but a few months into President Trump's term, it's going well. They do also, however, caution that that could all change tomorrow, that President Trump can easily change his mind.
Precisely, because if there's anything that the last few months of Trump in power teaches us, is that we should all be cautious about any attempts to find logic, coherence and consequences in Trump, especially in foreign policy, I guess. But staying with you still, David, there's another issue that sort of fits into the larger position of Britain on the international stage. Also, when you look at the bilateral relationship with the United States, and that's, of course, Ukraine. That seems to be very much a divisive issue for many politicians in many countries in Europe, and then Sir Keir Starmer, on the one hand, appears to be very willing to take part in different coalitions initially was very upfront, honest about the possibility of British troops being sent to Ukraine. Now that position seems to be backtracking a little bit. How is that received domestically with the electorate?
Well, look, there is very strong support for UK government engagement on Ukraine. That goes across political parties. The extent to which the UK government is able to commit militarily is really an internal issue in a way into the government, into how the military functions. At a public level, I think they would find support whatever they were doing. We need to bear in mind that this strong support for Ukraine started under Prime Minister Boris Johnson, continued under Rishi Sunak, is continuing under Sir Keir Starmer. I think this is one of the few areas in UK engagement with Europe where there has been absolute consistency for a number of years, and I don't think that the current government is under pressure from the UK public. It's more a matter of what they're able to achieve and how much budget is available for that.
So let's talk about domestic pressure, since you both seem to be so keen to anticipate questions about the one and only Nigel Farage. Ivan, over to you. But before I actually ask my question, I will let the man speak himself. Here's Nigel Farage making comments about US-UK relationship.
The American economy has doubled in size in 15 years, doubled against the Eurozone. A deal with America is a very, very big prize. Don't let getting too close to the EU ruin it.
When you look at the polls, Reform UK is by far the most popular political party in the United Kingdom right now. A frank question to you, Ivan. How important is Nigel Farage for Keir Starmer right now?
Well, he's an important figure, and let's be honest, he's been an important figure in UK politics for 20 years, and arguably the most successful UK politician, despite not having been in the House of Commons, that Britain has had in the last 20 years in terms of achieving his strategic objectives. And he's a formidable right-wing populist operator with considerable political skills and rhetorical skills. So he matters, and the Conservative Party is in deep trouble, having lost the last election, having been in office either in coalition or on their own for 14 years. They turned to a new leader who so far has made very little impact on the public debate. And Farage is dominating the headlines and dominating opposition politics, and in many ways framing UK politics, which is why he's popular. Where is the discontent coming from vis-a-vis Labour? Well, Labour didn't come in on a surge of enthusiasm for Labour in the first place. It came in on a desperate desire to get rid of what looked like an increasingly bankrupt Conservative government. But Starmer was not in the position that Tony Blair was in back in 1997. He was never a tremendously popular figure for whom the public was waiting. I think some of this about Farage can be somewhat overstated. We're, not yet even at the end of year one of a government that might last 5 years. Governments tend to be unpopular as they get towards the midterm. This one has become unpopular extremely rapidly, and the sense that it is drifting and that it isn't clear on its kind of priorities and its narrative is certainly out there. But one can exaggerate this. There's a long time to go until the next election, and an awful lot of things are going to happen both in Britain and the world. I think Labour has had great difficulty in articulating what it's for, what it's about. And Farage doesn't have that difficulty.
Populist politics, they don't actually have to adapt more often than they have to, which is usually enough for populist politicians and parties to win elections. It seems to be the case that Keir Starmer was hoping for at least 5 peaceful years in power. Maybe even 10, as I recall the moment when they got elected last year. But he will probably have, as you both know, no peace at all, especially with Trump, Farage, Vladimir Putin, and others in the picture. Which means British politics will get even more interesting, and we will be coming back to revisit that in our future episodes. Ivan Rogers, David Henig were our guests tonight. Thank you very much and have a good evening. A decade ago, Brexit won, fueled by nostalgia for Britain's past greatness. After all, it used to be an empire that ran half of the planet. Ironically, it now has a serious chance of becoming relevant again. But it is squandering that opportunity, largely due to lack of clearly defined priorities. And Starmer can only have himself to blame for that. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next week, we will try to examine the state of NATO ahead of the summit in Hague. Make sure you're with us next Thursday, follow us on YouTube, and have a good evening.